"You're not dying fast enough." Those were the words Elena heard from her sister's lips as she lay in the hospital bed, tubes snaking from her arms like lifelines to nowhere. The morphine made everything fuzzy, but those words cut through the haze like glass. Maya, her twin sister, the person who had shared a womb with her for 9 months, was standing at the foot of her bed holding discharge papers and a suitcase. "The insurance won't cover this anymore," Maya continued, her voice clinical and cold. "You need to come home and stop being dramatic about a little chemotherapy." But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena is 28 years old, and that was the moment she realized that blood doesn't always run thicker than poison. What Maya didn't know was that Elena had been recording everything on her phone, tucked under her pillow. What Maya didn't expect was that the oncology team had been documenting every conversation, every visitor interaction, every red flag. And what Maya definitely didn't see coming was Dr. Harrison's envelope, sealed and waiting, containing security footage that would shatter everything Maya thought she'd hidden. By the time Maya discovered what Elena had been planning during those long nights in the hospital, the medical board had already been contacted, the insurance fraud investigation was underway, and the local news had picked up a story about medical abuse that would make Maya's name trend for all the wrong reasons. No lawyers, no warnings, just a twin sister who had finally learned that sometimes the person who shares your DNA can be the one trying to bury you alive. So here's the question that'll haunt you. When the person closest to you decides your life isn't worth saving, do you lie down and let them win? Or do you fight back with everything you've got left? Drop your thoughts in the comments because Elena's about to show you exactly what she chose. The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Oncology Ward buzzed like angry wasps, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even healthy skin look jaundiced. Elena Martinez had been staring at those lights for 3 weeks now, counting the flickers, memorizing the pattern of shadows they threw across the ceiling tiles. Room 847 had become her entire world, a 12 by 12 universe that smelled of antiseptic and the lingering ghost of cafeteria meatloaf. The diagnosis had come swift and brutal, like a sledgehammer to the chest. Stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive, requiring immediate and intensive treatment. Elena had always prided herself on being strong, the type of woman who fixed her own car and opened her own jars. But cancer didn't care about your self-reliance. It took what it wanted and left you hollow, grateful for every breath that didn't taste like copper. Maya had been there for the diagnosis, holding Elena's hands so tightly that her knuckles went white. Identical twins. They'd shared everything since birth. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn cowlick that refused to lay flat, the same quick laugh that could fill a room. They'd bought houses 3 blocks apart, called each other every morning, finished each other's sentences like some cosmic joke about genetic programming. "We'll get through this together," Maya had whispered that first day, her voice thick with tears. "You're not doing this alone, Ellie, I promise." For the first week, Maya had been everything Elena needed. She'd slept in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside the hospital bed, bringing homemade soup and magazines, organizing Elena's medication schedule with military precision. She'd held Elena's hair back when the nausea hit, wiped her face with cool washcloths, and stayed up all night during the worst of the chemo reactions. But something shifted during the second week, subtle at first, like a radio slowly losing its signal. Maya started arriving later, leaving earlier. The homemade soup was replaced by drive-through containers, the magazines forgotten in favor of Maya scrolling through her phone while Elena dozed fitfully between treatments. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" Dr. Harrison had asked during his morning rounds, his kind eyes taking in Elena's pale complexion and the dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide. "Like I've been hit by a truck," Elena had managed, trying for a smile that felt more like a grimace. "But I'm fighting." Dr. Harrison was the kind of doctor who still believed in bedside manner, who remembered that behind every chart and diagnosis was a human being scared out of their mind. He'd been practicing oncology for 23 years, and Elena could see in his expression that he'd delivered too much bad news, held too many hands, watched too many battles that ended in loss. "The treatment is working," he'd said, settling into the chair Maya usually occupied. "The tumor markers are dropping and the imaging shows significant shrinkage. You're responding beautifully to the protocol." Elena had felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. It unfurled in her chest like a flower opening to sunlight, fragile but determined. She was going to beat this thing. She was going to survive. That afternoon, Maya had arrived with a stack of papers and an expression Elena had never seen before, cold and calculating, like she was solving a math problem rather than visiting her sick sister. "We need to talk about practical things," Maya had said, settling into the chair without her usual kiss on Elena's forehead. "Money things, insurance things." Elena had felt her stomach clench, and not from the chemotherapy. "What kind of things?" "Your treatment is expensive, Ellie, like really expensive. And your insurance has been fighting some of the claims." Maya pulled out a manila folder, thick with paperwork. "I've been handling your bills while you've been here, and it's getting bad." The folder contained medical bills, insurance denials, statements from the hospital's billing department, numbers that made Elena's head spin, figures with so many zeros they looked like abstract art. 200,000 for the first round of chemo, 50,000 for the surgery consultation, 30,000 for imaging and lab work. "How is this possible?" Elena had whispered, her voice barely audible over the steady beep of her IV monitor. "I have good insurance through work." "Had good insurance," Maya corrected. "Remember? You had to take medical leave, and after 12 weeks, your coverage changes. You're on Cobra now, and it's not covering everything." Elena had felt the room spin, the fluorescent lights blurring into streaks of nausea-inducing yellow. The hope that had bloomed in her chest began to wither, replaced by a familiar dread that tasted like metal and fear.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"What are you saying, Maya? I'm saying we need to be realistic about this, about what's sustainable." Maya had leaned forward, her voice taking on the same tone she'd used as children when she was trying to convince Elena to go along with some questionable scheme. "Maybe it's time to consider alternative options." Alternative options? There are clinical trials, experimental treatments. Some of them don't cost anything, and you might be helping other people with cancer too. Maya had spread out pamphlets for various research programs, her movements quick and efficient. Dr. Harrison mentioned some possibilities. Elena had stared at the pamphlets, her mind struggling to process what Maya was suggesting. Clinical trials meant stopping her current treatment, the treatment that Dr. Harrison had just told her was working. It meant becoming a test subject, rolling the dice on unproven therapies while her cancer potentially spread unchecked. "Maya, Dr. Harrison said the current treatment is working. The tumor is shrinking." "But at what cost, Ellie? You're going to bankrupt yourself, and for what? A few more months? A few more years?" Maya's voice had taken on an edge Elena had never heard before, sharp and impatient. "You need to think about this logically, not emotionally." That night, Elena had lain awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the hospital at night. Footsteps in the hallway, the distant ding of elevator doors, the whispered conversations of the night shift nurses. Maya's words echoed in her head like a broken record. At what cost? A few more months. Think logically. The next morning brought a parade of financial counselors and insurance representatives, all of them speaking in the same careful, sympathetic tone that somehow managed to convey both pity and impatience. They spread out more paperwork, more forms, more options, that all seemed to boil down to the same thing. Elena's life wasn't worth the cost of saving it. "There are programs," one of the counselors had explained, her voice artificially bright. "Payment plans, charity care applications, pharmaceutical assistance programs. It will require some paperwork and time, but we can work something out." Elena had felt a flicker of relief, but Maya had cut in before she could respond. "How much time?" Maya had asked, because Elena needs to make decisions about her treatment plan now, not in 6 months when the paperwork gets processed. The counselor has shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Elena and Maya. "Well, these programs can take some time to approve, sometimes several months for the more comprehensive packages." "See," Maya had said after the counselor left, "it's not realistic, Ellie. You can't put your life on hold waiting for maybe help from maybe programs." But Elena had started to notice things that made her skin crawl with unease. The way Maya's eyes lit up when discussing the clinical trials, the speed with which she'd gathered all the alternative treatment information, the fact that Maya seemed to know more about Elena's insurance situation than Elena did. Dr. Harrison had stopped by that evening during his late rounds, finding Elena staring out the window at the parking lot below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of childhood summers when she and Maya would lie on their backs in the backyard, pointing out shapes in the clouds. "How are you holding up?" he'd asked, settling into the visitor's chair. "I know the financial discussions can be overwhelming." "Dr. Harrison, can I ask you something?" Elena had turned to face him, studying his expression. "The clinical trials my sister has been researching, are they really better options than what we're doing now?" Dr. Harrison had been quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Elena, your current treatment protocol is the gold standard for your type and stage of cancer. The response you're showing is exactly what we want to see. Clinical trials can be valuable, but they're typically for patients who haven't responded to standard treatments or for those who can't access standard treatments for other reasons." Other reasons? Financial constraints, insurance issues, geographic limitations. He'd paused, studying her face. "Has someone suggested that your current treatment isn't the best option for you medically?" Elena had felt something cold settle in her stomach. "My sister thinks maybe the cost isn't worth it, that I should consider alternatives." Dr. Harrison's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly, the kind of change that probably went unnoticed by most people, but that Elena, who'd spent her life reading faces and interpreting subtleties, caught immediately. It was concern, but not the medical kind. It was the kind of concern that came from seeing something that didn't add up. "Elena, I need you to understand something very clearly. Your cancer is treatable. With your current response rate, your prognosis is very good. The treatment is working exactly as we hoped it would." His voice had taken on a firmness that cut through the hospital's constant background noise. "Financial concerns are valid, and we can work through them, but they should never be the primary factor in making medical decisions about treatable cancer." That night, Elena had started paying attention to things she'd previously dismissed. The way Maya handled her phone calls just outside her room, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when Elena stirred. The fact that Maya seemed to know Elena's insurance representative by name, despite Elena never having spoken to the woman before. The way Maya redirected conversations whenever Elena asked specific questions about her bills or coverage. It was during one of Maya's whispered phone conversations that Elena had made the decision that would change everything. She'd pretended to be asleep, slowing her breathing and keeping her eyes closed, while Maya spoke in urgent, frustrated tones just outside her door. "No, that's not going to work," Maya had hissed into her phone. "She's responding to the treatment too well. The doctors are optimistic, and she's buying into it." Elena's blood had frozen in her veins. "What do you mean? What am I supposed to do about it? You told me this would be straightforward. Get her into a trial, get her off the expensive treatment, let nature take its course." Maya's voice had cracked with stress. "But she's not dying, okay? She's getting better." Elena had lain perfectly still, her heart pounding so loud she was sure Maya would hear it through the wall. The morphine drip made everything feel surreal, like she was floating just above her body, watching this nightmare unfold from a distance. "I can't just tell her to stop treatment. She'll ask questions. She'll want second opinions." Maya had paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the call. "Look, I'm doing what I can. I've got her convinced the insurance won't cover it. I've shown her the bills. But she's talking about applying for assistance programs, and that idiot doctor keeps telling her how well she's doing." Elena had stopped breathing entirely. 6 months. You said 6 months, and then everything would be settled. But at this rate, she's going to beat this thing, and then where does that leave us? Another pause. Longer this time. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, if she figures out what's happening, you're on your own. I'm not going to prison because you couldn't wait for a natural death." The call had ended, and Elena had heard Maya's footsteps approaching her room. She'd forced herself to maintain the slow, steady breathing of sleep, even as every cell in her body screamed to run, to call for help, to do something, anything other than lie there and pretend she hadn't just heard her twin sister discussing her death like a business transaction. Maya had stood in the doorway for several minutes, and Elena had felt her sister's eyes on her, studying her face for any sign that she had been awake. Finally, Maya had approached the bed and adjusted Elena's blanket, the gesture so gentle and caring that Elena nearly broke character and started screaming. "Sleep well, Ellie," Maya had whispered, pressing a soft kiss to Elena's forehead. "Everything's going to be okay." But everything was not going to be okay. Elena had lain awake the rest of the night, her mind racing through everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The sudden insurance problems that Maya had been handling, the aggressive push toward clinical trials, the way Maya seemed to have inside information about Elena's medical situation that she shouldn't have had access to. And underneath it all, the most terrifying question: who had Maya been talking to, and what did they gain from Elena's death? The next morning brought another visit from Dr. Harrison, but this time Elena was ready for him. She'd spent the pre-dawn hours planning exactly what she needed to say, how she could get information without revealing what she'd overheard. "Dr. Harrison, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about my treatment working well." She kept her voice casual, conversational. "Can you walk me through exactly what my prognosis looks like? I want to make sure I understand everything clearly." Dr. Harrison had settled into his chair, opening her chart across his lap. "Of course, your initial diagnosis was stage 3 invasive ductal carcinoma. That sounds scary, but it's actually very treatable with early intervention, which is exactly what we did." He'd shown her the imaging results, pointing out how the tumor had shrunk by 60% over the course of her treatment. Her blood markers had dropped into normal ranges. Her body was responding exactly as they had hoped. "What would happen if I stopped treatment now?" Elena had asked, watching his face carefully. Dr. Harrison had frowned, closing the chart. "Elena, why would you want to stop treatment? You're doing beautifully." "Hypothetically, if someone in my situation stopped treatment to pursue other options." "Hypothetically, it would be a very poor decision. Your cancer is aggressive, and while it's responding well to treatment, stopping now would allow it to regain ground very quickly." His frown had deepened. "Elena, has someone suggested you should stop your current treatment?" "My sister mentioned clinical trials." "Clinical trials are valuable research tools, but they're not appropriate for every patient."
In your case, with your excellent response to standard treatment, participating in a trial would be taking a significant and unnecessary risk. Dr. Harrison had leaned forward, his voice taking on the same firm tone from the night before. "Who exactly has been discussing clinical trials with you?" Elena had felt the walls closing in. She'd needed information, but she'd also needed to be careful. If Maya was involved in something criminal, Elena couldn't tip her hand too early. "Just Maya. She's been researching options." "I see." Dr. Harrison had been quiet for a moment, and Elena had seen him making some kind of decision. "Elena, would it be helpful if I sat down with both you and Maya to discuss your treatment options? Sometimes having everyone hear the same information at the same time can prevent misunderstandings." "That would be great," Elena had said. But even as she'd agreed, she'd known that Maya would find a way to avoid or control that conversation. Maya had become expert at managing information flow, at being the gatekeeper between Elena and everyone else involved in her care. That afternoon had brought another revelation. Elena had been half dozing when she'd heard familiar voices in the hallway outside her room. Maya was talking to someone, but this time Elena had recognized the other voice. James Morrison, Elena's ex-boyfriend and the beneficiary of her life insurance policy from when they'd been engaged 3 years earlier. Elena had never changed the beneficiary after their breakup. It was one of those administrative tasks that had gotten lost in the chaos of moving out, dividing belongings, and trying to rebuild her life. She'd meant to update it, had even filled out the paperwork at one point, but had never gotten around to submitting it. The policy was worth $500,000. "She's doing better than expected," Maya had been saying. "The treatment is working." "That's good news, right?" James had replied, but his tone had been flat, uncertain. It's complicated. The expenses are astronomical, and even if she beats the cancer, she'll be financially ruined. Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't be kinder to let her go peacefully. Elena had felt bile rise in her throat. Maya was talking to James about her death like they were discussing the weather. And James, who had supposedly loved her once, wasn't objecting to the suggestion that she should die? What are you saying, Maya? I'm saying that sometimes fighting isn't the brave choice. Sometimes the brave choice is knowing when to let go. And the insurance policy would go to you as the beneficiary, which you could use to pay off her medical debts, honor her memory properly. It's what she would want. Elena had pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making any sound. Maya and James were discussing her life insurance like they were planning a vacation. They wanted her dead, and they wanted the money that would come from her death. But Elena had also realized something else. They needed her to choose to stop treatment. If she died from medical neglect or deliberate harm, there would be investigations, questions, potential criminal charges. But if she made the decision herself to pursue ineffective treatment or to give up entirely, then her death would be tragic but not suspicious. That evening, Elena had made a decision that probably saved her life. She'd waited until Maya left for dinner, then had called the nurse's station and asked to speak with Dr. Harrison privately. "I need to tell you something," she'd said when he'd arrived, closing the door behind him. "And I need you to listen to everything before you respond." She'd told him about Maya's phone conversation, about James' visit, about the life insurance policy she'd never changed. She'd explained her growing suspicions about Maya's involvement in her insurance problems and her aggressive push toward ineffective treatments. Dr. Harrison had listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. When Elena had finished, he'd been quiet for a long time, processing everything she'd told him. "Elena, these are very serious accusations. If what you're telling me is true, then what you're describing is insurance fraud, conspiracy, and potentially attempted murder. I know how it sounds, but I know my sister, and this isn't normal behavior for her. She's never been interested in my finances before, never pushed me to make medical decisions, never talked about me dying like it was inevitable. What do you want me to do with this information? I want you to help me document everything. I want to make sure that if something happens to me, there's a record of what I told you." Elena had met his eyes, and she'd seen her own fear reflected back at her. "And I want to make sure my treatment continues, regardless of what Maya or anyone else says about insurance or costs." Dr. Harrison had nodded slowly. "I'm going to contact hospital security and our patient advocacy department. We're going to put some protections in place, and we're going to make sure your medical decisions remain between you and your medical team." "What kind of protections?" "Security cameras in your room, recording devices, restricted access to your medical information. And I'm going to document this conversation in your medical record, along with my observations about your sister's behavior." That night, Elena had felt safer than she had in weeks, but she'd also known that the real confrontation was still coming. Maya wasn't going to give up easily, and James had 500,000 reasons to see Elena's treatment fail. She'd been right. The next morning had brought Maya with discharge papers and a suitcase, ready to take Elena home and away from the medical supervision that was keeping her alive. "You're not dying fast enough." Those words had cut through the air like a blade.
Maya was no longer pretending to care about Elena's well-being. She was openly frustrated that Elena was surviving, openly resentful that the cancer treatment was working. But what Maya hadn't known was that Dr. Harrison had been recording everything from the hallway, that hospital security had been monitoring Elena's room since their conversation the night before, that every word Maya spoke was being documented as evidence of medical abuse and fraud. Elena had looked at her sister, really looked at her, and had seen a stranger wearing Maya's face. The woman standing at the foot of her bed wasn't the sister who had shared her childhood, who had braided her hair and shared her secrets. This woman was a predator, and Elena was her prey. "I'm not going anywhere, Maya," Elena had said quietly. "My treatment is working, and I'm staying until it's finished." Maya's mask had slipped completely then, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Elena, be reasonable. You're bankrupting yourself for a few extra months of life. Is it really worth it?" "My life is worth it to me." But think about the burden you're putting on everyone else. The medical bills, the emotional stress, the false hope you're giving people who care about you. Maya had stepped closer to the bed, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she'd perfected as children. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let go. Let go? Or give up so you and James can collect my life insurance? Maya had gone very still, her face draining of color. For a moment, Elena had seen a flicker of the sister she remembered, the one who looked stricken and ashamed and terrified. But then Maya's expression had hardened into something Elena had never seen before, something cold and dangerous and desperate. I don't know what you think you heard, but you're confused. The medication is making you paranoid. I heard you on the phone, Maya. I heard you talking about letting nature take its course. I heard you discussing my death like a business transaction. Maya had moved closer to Elena's bedside, her movements quick and aggressive. For a moment, Elena had been genuinely afraid that Maya might try to physically harm her, might disconnect her IV or interfere with her medication. But then Dr. Harrison had appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 hospital security guards. "Miss Martinez," he'd said, addressing Maya formally, "I need you to ask you to step away from your sister and come with us." Maya had looked between Elena and Dr. Harrison, and Elena had seen the exact moment when Maya realized that her plan had unraveled, that Elena knew everything, that there would be consequences for what she had attempted. "You don't understand," Maya had said, her voice rising with panic. "She's sick. The cancer has spread to her brain. She's having delusions, paranoid episodes. She needs psychiatric evaluation." "Miss Martinez," Dr. Harrison had repeated, his voice firm and professional, "please come with us now." Maya had looked at Elena one last time, and in that look, Elena had seen hatred so pure and venomous that it had taken her breath away. This wasn't disappointment or frustration or even greed. This was genuine hatred, the kind that came from years of hidden resentment and suppressed rage. "This isn't over," Maya had whispered as the security guards escorted her from the room. But it was over, at least the immediate danger. Elena had collapsed back against her pillows, shaking from adrenaline and relief and the lingering effects of everything that had just happened. Dr. Harrison had returned an hour later with updates that had made Elena's head spin. Hospital security had reviewed weeks of footage showing Maya's interactions with Elena, documenting her aggressive attempts to convince Elena to stop treatment. They'd recorded her phone conversations in the hallway, capturing her discussions with James about Elena's life insurance policy. More shocking had been the discovery that Maya had been intercepting Elena's mail, including correspondence from her insurance company about claims approval and assistance programs that Elena had never seen. Maya had been actively preventing Elena from accessing financial resources that would have made her treatment affordable. "There's more," Dr. Harrison had said, his expression grim. "We contacted your insurance company directly. Your coverage is actually much better than Maya led you to believe. Most of your treatment costs are covered, and there are assistants." Maya had stared at him, processing the implications. "So, I was never in financial danger from my treatment?" Not to the extent Maya claimed. Yes, there would have been some out-of-pocket costs, but nothing that would have resulted in bankruptcy or financial ruin. The betrayal had hit Elena like a physical blow. Maya had fabricated a financial crisis to pressure Elena into stopping life-saving treatment. She'd lied about insurance coverage, hidden assistance programs, and created artificial urgency around decisions that didn't need to be made. "Why?" Elena had whispered. "Why would she do this?" Dr. Harrison had been quiet for a long moment. "I think that's a question for law enforcement to answer. But Elena, I need you to understand something very clearly. Your sister was attempting to convince you to make medical decisions that would have resulted in your death. What she was doing wasn't just fraud or deception, it was attempted murder." The words had hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Attempted murder. Maya had been trying to kill her, slowly and indirectly, but deliberately nonetheless. That afternoon had brought detectives, social workers, and representatives from the district attorney's office. Elena had told her story again and again, each repetition making the reality more concrete and more horrifying. Maya had been arrested on charges of insurance fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. James had been arrested the same day, charged as Maya's co-conspirator. The investigation had revealed that they'd been in contact for months, planning Elena's death and discussing how to split the life insurance payout. They'd researched her medical condition, studied survival rates, and calculated how long they'd need to wait for her to die naturally versus how they could accelerate the process. Elena had spent that evening staring out her hospital window, watching the sun set over the parking lot where Maya used to park her car during visiting hours. The sky had been painted in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of their childhood, of summer afternoons when they'd lain on their backs pointing out shapes in the clouds. She'd wondered when Maya had started hating her, when love had curdled into resentment and greed. Had it been years of hidden jealousy, financial pressure Elena didn't know about? Or had Maya always been capable of this kind of cold calculation, hidden behind a mask of sisterly affection? Dr. Harrison had stopped by during his evening rounds, finding Elena still at the window. "How are you holding up?" he'd asked, settling into the familiar chair Maya used to occupy. "I keep thinking I should be more surprised," Elena had said. But looking back, there were signs. Small things that didn't add up, questions that didn't get answered, information that came through Maya instead of directly to me. "Trust your instincts," Dr. Harrison had said. "They probably saved your life." What happens now? Now you focus on getting well. Your treatment continues as planned, your insurance issues get resolved, and you concentrate on beating this cancer. He'd paused, studying her face. And you start thinking about what kind of support system you want to build going forward. Elena had nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying directly. Maya had been her primary support person, her emergency contact, her advocate and companion. Now Elena faced the rest of her cancer treatment alone. But she'd also realized that alone might be safer than the alternative Maya had offered. The next few weeks had passed in a blur of continued treatment, legal consultations, and the slow process of rebuilding trust in the people around her. The nursing staff had been incredibly supportive, checking on her frequently and making sure she had everything she needed. Elena's treatment had continued to go well. The tumor had continued shrinking, her blood markers had remained stable, and Dr. Harrison had expressed cautious optimism about her long-term prognosis. Without the stress of financial worry and Maya's constant pressure to give up, Elena had felt stronger and more hopeful than she had since her diagnosis. The legal case had moved forward quickly. Maya and James had both attempted to claim that they'd been acting in Elena's best interests, trying to save her from financial ruin and unnecessary suffering. But the recorded conversations, security footage, and documentary evidence had painted a clear picture of deliberate deception and attempted harm. Maya's lawyer had tried to negotiate a plea bargain, but Elena had refused to support any deal that didn't include significant prison time. Maya had betrayed not just Elena's trust, but the most fundamental bond between siblings. She'd tried to convince Elena to choose death over life, and she'd done it for money. The trial had been scheduled for 6 months later, but Elena had known she wouldn't be the same person by then. Cancer had already changed her in ways she was still discovering, but Maya's betrayal had completed a transformation that had started with her diagnosis. She was no longer the trusting, accommodating person who'd shared everything with her twin sister. She was someone harder, more cautious, more aware of the capacity for evil that could hide behind familiar faces. But she was also someone who'd learned to fight for herself, who discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. 2 months after Maya's arrest, Elena had received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Harrison had knocked on her door early one morning, carrying an envelope that looked official and important. "Elena, I have something I need to show you," he'd said, settling into the familiar chair beside her bed. "It's about Maya's case, but it's also about something else we discovered during the investigation." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents, medical records and correspondence that Elena had never seen.
During the investigation into Maya's activities, we subpoenaed her phone records and email accounts. What we found was more extensive than anyone expected. Dr. Harrison had spread the documents across Elena's bed table. Maya wasn't just trying to influence your treatment decisions. She was actively sabotaging your care. Elena had felt her blood turn cold. What do you mean? She'd been contacting your insurance company, posing as you, and specifically requesting that certain treatments not be covered. She'd been intercepting appointment confirmations and rescheduling them for later dates. She'd even called our office multiple times, claiming to be you, and asking us to delay treatment starts. The room had started spinning around Elena. Maya hadn't just been passively hoping for Elena's death. She'd been actively working to cause it, creating delays and obstacles that could have allowed the cancer to progress beyond treatable stages. There's more, Dr. Harrison had continued. We found correspondence between Maya and several clinical trial programs. She'd been trying to enroll you in trials for experimental treatments, using forged signatures and falsified medical information. Elena had stared at the documents, recognizing Maya's handwriting on several forms, seeing her own forged signature on papers she'd never seen. The trials she was trying to enroll you in weren't appropriate for your diagnosis. They were for much more advanced cancers, terminal cases where experimental treatment was a last resort. Dr. Harrison's voice was quiet but firm. If she'd succeeded in getting you into one of these programs, you'd have stopped your effective treatment in favor of experimental drugs that weren't designed for your condition.
She was trying to kill me, Elena had whispered, the words feeling strange and horrible in her mouth. Yes, Dr. Harrison had said simply. She was. The additional evidence had strengthened the criminal case against Maya significantly. Her charges had been upgraded to include identity theft, medical fraud, and attempted murder in the first degree. James's charges had been similarly enhanced based on evidence of his active participation in the scheme. Elena had felt a strange mix of vindication and horror. She'd been right to trust her instincts, right to suspect that something was wrong with Maya's behavior. But being right meant accepting that her twin sister, the person who'd shared her childhood and her secrets, had spent months planning her death. The revelation had also explained some of the delays and complications Elena had experienced during her treatment. Appointments that had been mysteriously rescheduled, insurance claims that had taken longer than expected to process, test results that had somehow gotten lost in the system. Maya had been sabotaging Elena's care from the beginning, creating obstacles and delays that she'd hoped would allow the cancer to progress beyond treatability. Elena had spent that night thinking about trust, about how completely she'd believed in Maya's love and support. She'd never questioned Maya's information about insurance problems or treatment costs. She'd never thought to verify Maya's claims about her medical situation or to seek second opinions about her options. Maya had exploited Elena's vulnerability, her fear, and her trust to manipulate her toward making decisions that would result in her death. It was a betrayal so complete and calculated that Elena had struggled to comprehend how someone she'd loved could be capable of such cruelty. But the discovery had also brought an unexpected gift: clarity about her own strength and resilience. Elena had survived not just cancer, but a deliberate attempt on her life by the person she'd trusted most. She'd recognized the danger, trusted her instincts, and taken action to protect herself. She was stronger than she'd ever imagined. 3 months later, Elena had been discharged from the hospital. Her cancer was in remission, her treatment had been successful, and her prognosis was excellent. She'd moved into a small apartment across town, far from the house she'd shared with memories of Maya, far from the life they'd built together that had turned out to be built on lies. The criminal trial had been scheduled for the following month, and Elena had been preparing to testify against Maya and James. The prosecution had told her it would be difficult, that Maya's defense team would try to portray Elena as paranoid and confused, that they'd attempt to paint Maya's actions as misguided love rather than attempted murder. But Elena had been ready for that fight. She'd learned something important during her cancer treatment. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones trying to destroy you. And sometimes the only person you can truly count on is yourself. The day before the trial was set to begin, Elena had received an unexpected phone call from Maya's attorney. Maya wanted to see her, wanted to talk before the trial started. She was prepared to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a meeting with Elena. Elena had almost said no immediately. What could Maya possibly have to say that would matter now? What explanation could she offer that would make sense of months of deception and attempted murder? But curiosity had won over caution, and Elena had agreed to meet Maya in the county jail, with lawyers present and conversations recorded. Maya had looked smaller somehow, diminished in her orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. The confident, controlling woman who'd tried to manage Elena's death had been replaced by someone who looked exhausted and defeated. "I know you hate me," Maya had said as soon as Elena sat down across from her in the sterile visiting room. "I know you'll never forgive me." "Then why did you want to see me?" Maya had been quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded on the metal table between them. When she'd finally looked up, Elena had seen tears in her eyes, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since her arrest. Because I need you to understand that I loved you. Everything I did because I loved you." Elena had felt anger flare in her chest, hot and immediate. "You tried to kill me, Maya. You don't get to call that love." "I was trying to save you from suffering, from bankruptcy, from years of treatments that might not work, from false hope that would make everything worse." Maya's voice cracked. "I watched our grandmother die from cancer, Elena. I watched her suffer for months, watched her lose everything, watched her become a shadow of herself before she finally died anyway." Elena had remembered their grandmother's death, the long decline, the medical bills that had consumed her savings, the pain that seemed endless. But she'd also remembered their grandmother's fierce determination to keep fighting, her gratitude for every day she'd been given, her refusal to give up even when the odds were against her. Grandma chose to fight Maya. It was her choice to make. And I watched it destroy her. I watched it destroy our whole family. The bills, the stress, the false hope every time a treatment seemed to work for a few weeks. Maya had wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I couldn't watch you go through that. I couldn't watch cancer take everything from you the way it took everything from her." "So you decided to take everything from me first?" Maya had flinched as if Elena had hit her. "I thought if you chose to stop treatment early, if you chose to let go while you still had some dignity left, it would be easier for everyone." "Easier for you and James to collect my life insurance, you mean?" "The money was never the point. I know how it looks, but the money was just practical. Someone would have to pay your final expenses, handle your affairs, deal with the aftermath." Maya had leaned forward, her voice taking on the familiar, persuasive tone. "I thought if you were going to die anyway, at least the insurance money could do some good." Elena had stared at her sister, amazed by Maya's ability to rationalize attempted murder as an act of love. She genuinely seemed to believe that she was protecting Elena, that convincing her to stop life-saving treatment was a kindness. "Maya, I'm not dying. The treatment worked."
"I'm gonna be fine." "You don't know that," Maya had said quickly. "Cancer comes back. It spreads. You might have a few good years, but it's not cured. It's never really cured." And there it was, the core of Maya's delusion. She couldn't accept that Elena might survive, that the story might have a happy ending. Maya had convinced herself that Elena's death was inevitable, that hastening it was an act of mercy rather than murder. "Even if the cancer comes back someday, that's not your decision to make," Elena had said. "My life belongs to me, not to you. My choices about treatment and fighting and giving up belong to me." Maya had started crying then, the kind of desperate, ugly crying that came from someone who'd finally realized the magnitude of what they'd lost. "I was scared," she'd whispered. "I was so scared of watching you suffer the way Grandma suffered. I was scared of losing you slowly, piece by piece, over months or years. I thought if it happened quickly, if you just let go, it would hurt less for both of us." Elena had felt something she hadn't expected: pity. Maya had been so terrified of potential future pain that she tried to cause immediate death. She'd been so focused on avoiding suffering that she'd created the worst suffering possible. Maya, you didn't get to make that choice for me. You didn't get to decide that I was better off dead than fighting for my life. I know that now, Maya had said. I know I was wrong. I know I destroyed everything between us, but I need you to know that I thought I was protecting you. Elena had looked at her sister, really looked at her, and had seen the truth Maya couldn't admit even to herself. Maya hadn't been trying to protect Elena from suffering. She'd been trying to protect herself from the anxiety and uncertainty of Elena's illness. She'd been trying to control an uncontrollable situation, and when she couldn't control the cancer, she tried to control Elena instead. I can't forgive you, Maya, Elena had said finally. Maybe someday I'll understand why you did what you did, but I can't forgive trying to convince me to choose death over life. Maya had nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. I know that now. I just wanted you to understand that I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was saving you. You were saving yourself, Elena had said. From having to watch me fight, from having to support me through treatment, from having to deal with the possibility that I might die despite everything. You were protecting yourself, not me. The meeting had ended shortly after that, with Maya being escorted back to her cell and Elena walking out into the bright sunshine of the parking lot. She'd felt drained, but also strangely peaceful. Maya's explanation hadn't changed anything about what she'd done, but it had given Elena a sense of closure. Maya had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft. James had received 5 years for conspiracy and fraud. Elena had been present for the sentencing, sitting in the front row of the courtroom as the judge read the charges and announced the penalties. Maya had looked back at Elena once during the proceedings, and Elena had seen something in her sister's eyes that might have been regret or relief or simply exhaustion. Maya wouldn't be getting out of prison until Elena was in her late 30s, assuming she served her full sentence. Elena had walked out of the courthouse that day feeling like she was closing the door on one chapter of her life and opening another. The trial was over, the cancer was in remission, and she was alive despite Maya's best efforts to convince her otherwise. 6 months later, Elena had gotten a job with a nonprofit organization that provided support services to cancer patients and their families. She'd started as a patient advocate, helping people navigate insurance issues and treatment options, using her own experience to guide others through the system that had nearly failed her. Elena had discovered that Maya's tactics weren't uncommon. Financial manipulation, family pressure to stop treatment, deliberate misinformation about prognosis and options, these were tools that abusive family members used regularly to control sick relatives. Elena's case was extreme because of the life insurance motive, but the underlying pattern was familiar to many of the patients she worked with. She'd helped a 60-year-old man whose adult children were pressuring him to stop chemotherapy so they could inherit his house sooner. She'd assisted a young mother whose husband was telling her that experimental treatment was selfish because it would bankrupt their family. She'd supported a teenager whose parents were refusing to consent to treatment because they believed cancer was God's will. In each case, Elena had seen echoes of her own experience with Maya. Family members who claimed to love someone while actively working to shorten their life. People who used fear, guilt, and false information to manipulate medical decisions. Relatives who prioritized their own comfort or financial gain over a patient's right to fight for survival. Elena's work had given her a sense of purpose that went beyond her own survival. She was using her experience with betrayal and manipulation to help others recognize and resist similar pressures. She was turning her trauma into a tool for protecting other vulnerable patients. Dr. Harrison had become not just her oncologist, but a friend and mentor. He'd referred several patients to Elena's organization, and they'd collaborated on presentations about recognizing and reporting medical abuse by family members. "You've turned something terrible into something meaningful," he'd told Elena during one of her regular checkups, now annual visits to monitor for any signs of cancer recurrence. "I had to find a way to make sense of what happened," Elena had replied. "I couldn't just survive Maya's betrayal. I had to find a way to use it." Elena had also started speaking publicly about her experience, appearing at medical conferences and patient advocacy events. She told her story dozens of times, each telling making it feel less personal and more like a cautionary tale that could help other people avoid similar situations. The talks always ended with the same message: trust your instincts, verify information independently, and never let anyone else make your medical decisions for you. Your life belongs to you, and fighting for it is never selfish or wrong. 6 months later, Elena had gotten a letter from Maya. It had been forwarded through her lawyer, as Elena had requested no direct contact from Maya during her incarceration. The letter had been short and simple. "I heard your work with cancer patients. I'm glad you found a way to help people.
I think about you every day and hope you're still healthy. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm proud of what you've built from what I tried to destroy." Elena had read the letter several times, looking for manipulation or hidden meaning, but it had seemed genuinely straightforward. Maya was acknowledging Elena's work and expressing something that might have been genuine remorse. Elena had written back a single sentence: "I hope you're getting the help you need to understand why you thought love looked like control." She'd never received another letter from Maya, and she'd been fine with that. Some relationships couldn't be repaired. Some trust couldn't be rebuilt. Maya would always be her twin sister, but she would never again be someone Elena could rely on or confide in. 3 years after her diagnosis, Elena had been declared cancer-free. The 5-year mark would bring an official declaration of cure, but her doctors were optimistic about her long-term prognosis. The treatment that Maya had tried to convince her to abandon had saved her life. Elena had celebrated quietly with a small dinner with colleagues from work and a toast to Dr. Harrison and the medical team that had supported her through treatment and recovery. She'd thought about Maya briefly, wondering if she knew about Elena's continued good health, wondering if she felt regret or relief or nothing at all. But mostly, Elena had focused on the future. She'd survived cancer, attempted murder, and the complete betrayal of her closest family relationship. She'd learned to trust herself, to advocate for her own needs, and to find meaning in helping others navigate similar challenges. The apartment she'd chosen after leaving the hospital had become a real home, filled with plants and books and pictures of new friends she'd made through work and recovery. She'd adopted a cat from the animal shelter, an orange tabby named Phoenix, who seemed to understand that they'd both survived something that should have destroyed them. Elena had also started dating again, carefully and slowly, but with an openness to connection that had surprised her. She'd learned to recognize red flags earlier, to trust her instincts about people's motivations, to set boundaries that protected her without isolating her. The man she'd been seeing for 6 months, David, was a social worker who understood trauma and recovery. He'd never known Maya, never met Elena during her illness, and loved the strong, independent woman she'd become rather than trying to rescue or control her. "You're the bravest person I know," he'd told her after she'd shared her story with him. "Not because you fought cancer, but because you fought for yourself when everyone else told you to give up." Elena had realized that was exactly right. The cancer had been something that happened to her, but fighting Maya's manipulation had been a choice Elena had made. She'd chosen to trust her instincts over Maya's pressure. She'd chosen to seek help rather than suffer in silence. She'd chosen to fight for her life even when the person closest to her was trying to convince her it wasn't worth saving. On the 4th anniversary of her diagnosis, Elena had done something she'd been planning for months. She'd driven to the cemetery where her grandmother was buried, the grandmother whose suffering had supposedly motivated Maya's attempt to save Elena from a similar fate. Elena had sat beside the headstone for an hour, talking to her grandmother about everything that had happened. She'd told her about Maya's betrayal, about the successful treatment, about the work she was doing to help other patients. "I think you would have wanted me to fight," Elena had said to the quiet granite marker. "I think you would have been proud that I didn't give up, even when it would have been easier."
The wind had rustled through the trees around the cemetery, and Elena had felt a sense of peace that had been building slowly over the years since Maya's arrest. She'd survived everything that had been thrown at her, and she'd used that survival to make a difference in other people's lives. Elena had left a small bouquet of flowers on her grandmother's grave, the same type of lilies that her grandmother had grown in her garden. As she'd walked back to her car, she'd thought about Maya's twisted logic, the way she'd used their grandmother's suffering to justify trying to cause Elena's death. Their grandmother had suffered, yes, but she also fought. She'd chosen treatment, chosen hope, chosen to keep living even when the odds were against her. Maya had seen only the pain and missed the courage, the determination, the fierce love of life that had kept their grandmother fighting until the very end. Elena drove home that evening feeling connected to her grandmother's memory in a way that honored both the suffering and the strength. She'd learned that surviving wasn't just about beating cancer or avoiding death. It was about choosing to keep building a life worth living, even after betrayal, even after loss, even after discovering that the people you trust most might be the ones trying to destroy you. That night, Elena had called Dr. Harrison to thank him again for believing her when she'd told him about Maya's betrayal. If he hadn't taken her seriously, if he hadn't helped her document what was happening, Maya's plan might have succeeded. "You saved your own life," Dr. Harrison had told her. "I just provided some backup." Elena had replied, "You listened when I needed someone to hear me." That made all the difference. As Elena had hung up the phone, she'd realized that was exactly what she tried to provide for the patients she worked with now. Someone who would listen, someone who would believe them, someone who would help them trust their own instincts about their care and their relationships. Maya had tried to kill Elena slowly, using love as a weapon and trust as a tool of manipulation. But Elena had survived, and she'd learned something valuable from the experience. Sometimes the people who claim to know what's best for you are really trying to control you. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust yourself over everyone else. Elena's story had become a testament to the power of listening to your inner voice, even when it's telling you something you don't want to believe about someone you love. It was a reminder that surviving isn't just about overcoming illness or avoiding death. It's about refusing to let other people's fears, greed, or need for control determine the value and direction of your life. And as Elena settled into her apartment that night, Phoenix purring on her lap, and plans for the next day's patient advocacy work spread across her coffee table, she knew that she'd not only survived Maya's betrayal, she'd transcended it, turning attempted destruction into a force for protection and healing. The sister who had tried to convince her that her life wasn't worth saving had been wrong about everything. Elena's life was worth saving, worth fighting for, worth celebrating. And every day that she helped another patient recognize and resist similar manipulation was proof that Maya's betrayal had ultimately failed in the most complete way possible. Elena had not only refused to die when Maya wanted her to, she had chosen to live in a way that protected others from experiencing the same betrayal. It was the ultimate victory and the ultimate redemption of everything she'd suffered and survived. The courtroom felt like a fishbowl under fluorescent lights, every seat filled with reporters, legal observers, and curious onlookers who had followed Elena's case through local news coverage. Maya sat at the defendant's table in a navy blue suit that made her look professional and composed, nothing like the desperate woman who had been arrested in Elena's hospital room 6 months earlier. Her lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Richardson, had coached her well on courtroom demeanor. Maya kept her hands folded, her expression neutral, her posture suggesting confidence rather than guilt. Elena watched her sister from the witness stand, noting how Maya avoided eye contact, how she occasionally whispered to her attorney, and how she seemed to be performing the role of someone wrongly accused rather than someone caught hand-red attempting murder. The transformation was unsettling, but not surprising. Maya had always been good at adapting her personality to suit her needs, at becoming whatever version of herself would get her what she wanted. The prosecutor, District Attorney Catherine Walsh, had built her case methodically over the past months. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of courtroom presence that came from decades of putting criminals behind bars. Walsh had a reputation for taking on difficult cases, particularly those involving family abuse and financial crimes. She told Elena during their preparation sessions that Maya's case was the most calculated attempt at murder she'd encountered in her career.
Walsh had approached the witness stand with a folder of evidence, her movements deliberate and confident. She'd already established the timeline of Maya's deception through testimony from Dr. Harrison, hospital security footage, and recorded phone conversations.
Now she needed Elena to connect the emotional dots, to help the jury understand not just what Maya had done, but the psychological manipulation that had made it possible. Elena, can you describe your relationship with your sister Maya before your cancer diagnosis? Walsh asked, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Elena took a breath, centering herself before responding. She'd practiced this testimony dozens of times, but sitting here with Maya 10 feet away made everything feel surreal and raw. We were extremely close, Elena began, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. We talked every day, saw each other several times a week. She was my best friend, my confidant, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. Did you have any reason to doubt her loyalty or concern for your well-being? None whatsoever. Maya had always been protective of me, supportive of my decisions, encouraging when I faced challenges. I never questioned her motives or her love for me. Walsh nodded, making notes on her legal pad. When you were diagnosed with cancer, how did Maya initially respond? Ilana's throat tightened as she remembered those first days, when Maya's concern had seemed genuine and her support had felt like a lifeline. She was devastated, but she immediately stepped up to help me navigate the diagnosis and treatment options. She came to doctor appointments, researched treatment centers, organized my medication schedule. I felt incredibly grateful to have her support. When did you first notice changes in Maya's behavior or attitude toward your treatment? This was the crucial question. The moment when Elena needed to convey the subtle shift that had initially been easy to dismiss, but had eventually revealed itself as something much more sinister. About 2 weeks into my hospitalization, Maya started expressing concerns about the cost of my treatment. She began bringing me financial documents, insurance paperwork, bills that showed how expensive my care was becoming. Elena paused, collecting her thoughts. At first, I appreciated her handling these details for me. I was focused on getting through chemotherapy, and having someone manage the administrative side felt like a gift. Did Maya's concerns about cost seem reasonable to you at the time? Yes, initially. Cancer treatment is expensive, and I knew my insurance situation had changed when I went on medical leave. Maya presented information that made it seem like I was facing financial ruin if I continued with my current treatment plan. Walsh moved closer to the jury box, ensuring they could see Elena clearly as she answered the next series of questions. Can you describe this specific financial information Maya provided to you? Elena had reviewed these documents countless times during the investigation, each viewing making Maya's deception more clear and more painful. Maya showed me medical bills totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. She had insurance denial letters, correspondence from the hospital billing department, estimates for future treatment costs. Everything she showed me suggested that my insurance was covering very little of my care. Did you attempt to verify this information independently? No, I admitted, feeling the familiar sting of self-recrimination. I trusted Maya completely. She was handling all of my mail, all of my communications with insurance companies and billing departments. When she told me something about my coverage or costs, I accepted it as accurate. How did Maya's financial concerns affect your thinking about your treatment? Ilana closed her eyes briefly, remembering the crushing weight of believing she was choosing between her life and her financial future. I started to question whether continuing treatment was selfish. Maya presented it as a choice between bankrupting myself for a chance at survival versus accepting a terminal diagnosis with dignity. Walsh retrieved a document from her folder, approaching Ilana with what had been entered into evidence as Exhibit A47. Ilana, I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit A47. Can you identify this document? Ilana looked at the paper, recognizing Maya's handwriting on a legal pad that had been found in her apartment during the investigation. The page contained notes about Ilana's insurance policy, treatment costs, and what appeared to be calculations about how long Ilana might survive with different treatment approaches. This appears to be Maya's notes about my medical situation. I can see calculations about survival rates, treatment costs, and what looks like a timeline for different scenarios. Can you read the handwritten note at the bottom of the page? Ilana's voice caught as she read Maya's words aloud. E needs to understand that prolonging the inevitable is cruel to everyone involved, quality of life versus quantity. Help her see that choosing dignity over desperation is the loving choice. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft scratch of reporters' pens and the barely audible hum of the ventilation system. Ilana could feel the jury's attention focused on her, could sense their collective intake of breath as they processed Maya's calculated planning. Ilana, how did it feel to read those words for the first time? Like I was reading about a stranger. Maya was discussing my death like it was a problem to be solved, not a tragedy to be prevented. She was planning how to convince me that dying was better than fighting. Walsh moved on to the recorded phone conversations, playing excerpts that had become central to the prosecution's case. The jury listened to Maya's voice discussing Ilana's treatment response with frustration, heard her complaining that Ilana was not dying fast enough, witnessed her coordination with James about the life insurance payout. Ilana watched the jurors' faces as they heard Maya's words, saw their expression shift from curiosity to shock to disgust. Several jurors looked directly at Maya during the playback, their eyes searching for signs of remorse or recognition that went unnoticed. Maya maintained her neutral expression throughout, occasionally leaning over to whisper with her attorney, but showing no visible reaction to hearing her own voice discussing Ilana's death. The most damaging recording came near the end of Walsh's presentation. It was a conversation between Maya and James that had been captured by Ilana's phone, hidden under her hospital pillow during one of their visits. Maya's voice came through the courtroom speakers with crystal clarity. The doctor says she's responding well to treatment, better than expected. That's going to make this more complicated. James's response was equally clear. Complicated how? I thought the whole point was that she'd realized the treatment wasn't worth the cost. That was the plan, but she's actually getting better. The cancer's shrinking, her blood work is improving. If this keeps up, she's going to beat this thing. Maya's frustration was evident in her tone. So what do? We can't exactly tell her to stop treatment that's working.
Make it clear that continuing treatment will destroy her financially, even if she survives. Sometimes people need help understanding what's really best for them. And if she doesn't listen? There was a long pause before Maya responded, and when she spoke again, her voice was colder than Elena had ever heard it. Then we help her understand that some fights aren't worth winning. The recording ended, leaving the courtroom in heavy silence. Elena could see several jurors looking between her and Maya, processing the implications of what they'd just heard. Maya's defense team had argued that these conversations were taken out of context, that Maya was simply expressing concern about Elena's well-being in crude terms. But hearing the recordings in sequence, with the benefit of knowing how Maya's behavior had escalated, made her intentions unmistakable. Walsh spent the next hour walking Elena through the discovery of Maya's insurance fraud, the intercepted mail, the forged signatures on clinical trial applications. Each piece of evidence built on the previous one, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic deception and manipulation. The clinical trial applications were particularly damning. Maya had attempted to enroll Elena in experimental programs for terminal cancer patients using falsified medical records that made Elena's condition appear much more advanced than it actually was. The trials Maya had chosen were known for their low success rates and high risk of severe side effects. If Elena had been accepted into one of these programs, she would have stopped her effective treatment in favor of experimental drugs that weren't designed for her diagnosis. Dr. Martinez, using Elena's professional title to remind the jury of her intelligence and competence, did Maya ever discuss these clinical trial applications with you? Never directly. She mentioned clinical trials as an option, but she presented them as alternatives to consider if my current treatment failed or became too expensive. She never told me she had already begun application processes without my knowledge. How did you feel when you learned about these forged applications? Elena paused, remembering the moment Dr. Harrison had shown her the paperwork bearing her forged signature. Betrayed, violated, and terrified. Maya had been making medical decisions for me without my knowledge or consent. She was trying to get me into treatment programs that could have killed me more quickly than the cancer would have. The cross-examination by Maya's attorney, Richardson, was aggressive but ultimately ineffective. He attempted to portray Elena as paranoid, suggested that her cancer diagnosis had affected her judgment, and argued that Maya's actions were motivated by genuine concern rather than greed. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the recordings too clear, the documentation too comprehensive. Richardson's most damaging moment came when he tried to suggest that Elena had misinterpreted Maya's motives. Isn't it possible, Dr. Martinez, that your sister was simply trying to protect you from false hope? That she was concerned about your emotional well-being as much as your financial situation? Elena's response was immediate and firm. Mr. Richardson, there is no loving motivation for forging someone's signature on medical documents. There is no protective motivation for lying to insurance companies about someone's coverage. There is no caring motivation for secretly trying to enroll someone in inappropriate clinical trials. Maya wasn't protecting me from false hope. She was trying to ensure that I would die. The trial continued for 3 more days, with testimony from Dr. Harrison, hospital security personnel, insurance investigators, and digital forensics experts who had analyzed Maya's electronic communications. Each witness added another layer to the prosecution's case, making it clear that Maya's actions were not impulsive or emotional, but carefully planned and systematically executed. James testified as part of a plea agreement, admitting his role in the conspiracy and describing his communications with Maya about Elena's life insurance policy. His testimony was devastating to Maya's defense, as he detailed conversations about timing Elena's death to maximize the insurance payout and minimize the risk of investigation. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Dr. Harrison was recalled to testify about Elena's current medical status. Walsh had saved this testimony for last, wanting the jury's final impression to be of Elena's successful recovery rather than Maya's betrayal. Dr. Harrison, what is Elena's current medical status? Elena is cancer-free. Her most recent scans show no evidence of disease, her blood markers are normal, and her prognosis is excellent. Based on her response to treatment and current health status, I expect her to have a normal life expectancy. In your medical opinion, what would have happened if Elena had stopped her treatment when Maya was pressuring her to do so? Dr. Harrison's response was unequivocal. Elena would have died. Her cancer was aggressive and required immediate, intensive treatment. Any significant delay or interruption in her treatment protocol would have allowed the cancer to progress to an untreatable stage. So Maya's actions, if successful, would have resulted in Elena's death, without question. During closing arguments, Walsh painted a clear picture of attempted murder motivated by greed and enabled by trust. She reminded the jury that Maya Martinez didn't just betray her sister's trust, she weaponized that trust. She used Elena's love and reliance on her to convince Elena that her life wasn't worth saving. She forged documents, lied to insurance companies, and attempted to enroll Elena in inappropriate clinical trials, all in service of ensuring that Elena would die quickly enough for Maya and James to collect the insurance money. Richardson's closing argument focused on reasonable doubt and alternative interpretations of Maya's actions. He argued that Maya's behavior was misguided but not criminal, that her concerns about Elena's financial situation were legitimate, and that the conspiracy charges were based on circumstantial evidence rather than clear intent to cause harm. But the jury wasn't buying it. They deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: attempted murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Maya showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but Elena could see her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the defendant's table. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later.
Elena was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement, and she had spent days preparing remarks that would convey the full scope of Maya's betrayal without descending into simple anger or revenge. Elena stood at the podium facing Judge Williams, a woman known for her fairness, but also for her intolerance of crimes against vulnerable populations. The courtroom was packed again, with many of Elena's colleagues from the cancer advocacy organization present to show support. Your Honor, Maya Martinez was my twin sister, my best friend, and the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I was terrified, confused, and completely dependent on others to help me navigate the most frightening experience of my life. Elena paused, looking directly at Maya, who was finally meeting her eyes for the first time since the trial had begun. Maya exploited my fear and my trust to convince me that my life wasn't worth saving. She made me believe that fighting for my life was selfish, that choosing to live was a burden on everyone around me. She used my love for her as a weapon against my own survival instincts. The courtroom was completely silent as Elena continued.
But Maya's betrayal taught me something important about the value of life and the importance of fighting for it. Every day that I've lived since her arrest has been a day she tried to take from me. Every patient I've helped through my advocacy work represents a victory over the mentality that some lives aren't worth saving. Elena's voice grew stronger as she approached her conclusion. I'm not asking for maximum punishment out of anger or revenge. I'm asking for accountability because other vulnerable people need to know that exploiting someone's illness for financial gain will have serious consequences. Maya's actions weren't just crimes against me. They were crimes against the principle that every person deserves advocates who will fight for their life, not agents who will profit from their death. Judge Williams sentenced Maya to 12 years in prison, noting that the systematic nature of her deception and the vulnerability of her victim warranted a significant sentence. James received 7 years for his role in the conspiracy. Both were ordered to pay restitution to Elena for medical expenses, legal costs, and emotional damages. As court officers led Maya away in handcuffs, she looked back at Elena one final time. Elena couldn't read the expression on her sister's face. It might have been regret or anger or simply resignation. Elena felt no satisfaction in seeing Maya taken into custody, but she felt a deep sense of closure and justice. Outside the courthouse, Elena was surrounded by reporters asking for statements about the verdict and sentencing. She kept her remarks brief, focusing on the importance of patient advocacy and the need for stronger protections against medical abuse by family members. This case isn't just about my sister's betrayal, Elena told the assembled media. It's about the vulnerability that comes with serious illness and the need for systems that protect patients from those who would exploit that vulnerability. No one should have to worry that the people they trust most are working against their survival. Dr. Harrison was waiting for Elena as she finished her media interviews, and they walked together to the parking garage where her car was waiting. "How are you feeling?" he asked as they reached her car. "Relieved," Elena replied honestly, "and grateful. If you hadn't believed me when I told you about Maya's behavior, if you hadn't helped me document what was happening, she might have succeeded. You saved your own life by trusting your instincts and speaking up. I just provided some professional backup." Elena hugged Dr. Harrison goodbye, realizing that their relationship had evolved from doctor-patient to something more like mentorship and friendship. He had been not just her oncologist, but her ally in the fight against Maya's manipulation. The drive home gave Elena time to process everything that had happened over the past 8 months, from Maya's arrest through the trial and sentencing. She felt emotionally drained, but also strangely energized, ready to channel her experience into her advocacy work in new and more effective ways. Elena's apartment felt peaceful and quiet after the chaos of the courthouse. Phoenix greeted her at the door with loud purring and head bumps, and Elena spent several minutes sitting on the floor scratching behind his ears and allowing herself to feel the full weight of the day's events. She had survived cancer, attempted murder, and a very public trial that had examined the most intimate details of her relationship with Maya. She had testified against her own sister, watched Maya be sentenced to prison, and somehow emerged from the experience stronger and more determined than before. That evening, Elena called David to tell him about the verdict and sentencing. He had wanted to attend the trial to support her, but Elena had needed to face Maya alone, without the comfort of having someone there to lean on. "I'm proud of you," David said when she finished describing the day's events. "I know that couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't easy, but it was necessary," Elena replied. "Maya needed to face consequences for what she did, and other people need to see that this kind of abuse won't be tolerated." "What happens now?"
Elena looked around her apartment, at the life she had built since leaving the hospital, at the pictures of new friends and colleagues who had become her chosen family. She thought about the patients she worked with who reminded her daily of the importance of fighting for survival, of the advocacy work that had given her a sense of purpose beyond her own recovery. "Now I keep living," she said. "I keep working with cancer patients who are facing pressure from family members who claim to know what's best for them. I keep speaking at medical conferences about recognizing and preventing medical abuse. I keep proving every day that Maya was wrong about everything." Elena spent the next few days receiving calls and messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who had followed her case through media coverage. Many of the messages were from healthcare workers thanking her for bringing attention to the issue of family coercion in medical settings. Others were from patients or family members who had experienced similar pressure to stop treatment or accept poor prognosis without fighting. One message particularly stood out. It was from a woman named Sarah, whose husband had been trying to convince her to stop chemotherapy for lung cancer because the treatment was affecting their retirement savings. Sarah had seen Elena's story on the news and had realized that her husband's arguments were motivated by money rather than concern for her well-being. "Your courage to speak up about your sister's betrayal gave me the strength to get a second opinion and to insist on continuing my treatment," Sarah wrote. "My oncologist confirmed that my husband was giving me false information about my prognosis and treatment options. I'm now continuing treatment with a counselor who specializes in medical decision-making. Thank you for showing me that I have the right to fight for my life." Reading Sarah's message reminded Elena of why she had chosen to make her story public despite the painful scrutiny it had brought. Every person who recognized similar manipulation in their own situation, every patient who learned to trust their own instincts about their care, represented a victory over the mentality that nearly killed her. Elena's advocacy organization had seen a significant increase in requests for services since her case gained media attention. Patients were calling to report pressure from family members to stop treatment, to ask for help navigating insurance issues independently, to request assistance in getting a second opinion when family members were discouraging them from seeking additional medical input. The organization had also received increased funding from donors who had been moved by Elena's story and wanted to support other patients facing similar challenges. Elena used the additional resources to hire more patient advocates, expand their legal assistance program, and develop educational materials about recognizing and preventing medical coercion. 6 months after Maya's sentencing, Elena received an unexpected letter from Maya's prison counselor. Maya had requested permission to write to Elena, not to ask for forgiveness or to minimize her actions, but to provide information that might help Elena's advocacy work. The counselor explained that Maya had been participating in therapy sessions focused on understanding the psychology of financial abuse and medical coercion. Through these sessions, Maya had come to recognize patterns in her behavior that went beyond the specific crimes she had committed against Elena. Elena initially declined to receive any communication from Maya, but the counselor persisted, explaining that Maya's insights into her own manipulative tactics could potentially help other victims recognize similar behavior in their own families. After consulting with her own therapist and with David, Elena agreed to receive one letter from Maya, with the understanding that she was under no obligation to respond or to continue any correspondence. Maya's letter arrived 3 days later, forwarded through the prison system and Elena's attorney. It was longer than Elena had expected, written in Maya's familiar handwriting on standard prison stationery. "Elena," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to minimize what I did to you. I'm writing because my counselor thinks that sharing what I've learned about my own behavior might help you in your work with other patients." Maya went on to describe the therapy sessions she had been attending, the psychological evaluations she had undergone, and the insights she had gained into the mindset that had led her to systematically work towards Elena's death. "I realize now that I had been planning your death almost from the moment you were diagnosed," Maya wrote. "I told myself I was protecting you from suffering, but the truth is that I was protecting myself from the anxiety and uncertainty of your illness.
I couldn't control the cancer, so I tried to control you instead." The letter continued with Maya's analysis of the manipulation tactics she had used, isolating Elena from independent sources of information, creating artificial time pressure around medical decisions, using Elena's trust and love as leverage, and gradually escalating the pressure while maintaining plausible deniability about her motives. The most disturbing thing I've learned about myself is that I genuinely believed I was being loving and protective even while I was forging your signature and lying to your insurance company.
I had convinced myself that my actions were justified because I was saving you from false hope and financial ruin. Maya concluded the letter by providing specific examples of manipulation tactics that Elena might want to include in her educational materials for patients and families. I hope this information is useful to you, not because I want to minimize my guilt or earn any kind of redemption, but because I want something good to come from the terrible things I did to you. If my insights can help even one patient recognize similar manipulation from their family members, then maybe my actions will have served some purpose beyond destruction. Elena read Maya's letter several times, analyzing it for signs of continued manipulation or self-serving justification, but the letter seemed genuinely focused on providing useful information rather than seeking sympathy or forgiveness. Elena shared the letter with her advocacy organization's clinical director, who confirmed that Maya's insights were indeed valuable for understanding the psychology of medical coercion. They incorporated some of Maya's observations into their training materials for healthcare workers and patient advocates. Elena never responded to Maya's letter, but she did use the information Maya had provided to develop more effective educational programs about recognizing family manipulation in medical settings. Maya's detailed explanation of her own manipulative tactics became the basis for a checklist that patients could use to evaluate whether family members were providing accurate information and genuine support. The checklist included warning signs like family members who insisted on handling all communication with medical providers, who provided financial information that couldn't be verified independently, who discouraged patients from seeking second opinions, and who framed medical decisions in terms of burden on the family rather than benefit to the patient. Elena's advocacy work continued to expand as her expertise in medical coercion became recognized nationally. She was invited to speak at medical schools, nursing programs, and social work conferences about the intersection of family dynamics and medical decision-making. 1 year after Maya's sentencing, Elena was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee that was considering legislation to strengthen protections against medical abuse by family members. She used her testimony to recommend specific policy changes that would make it harder for family members to manipulate vulnerable patients. Elena's recommendations included requirements for independent verification of insurance information, mandatory reporting protocols for suspected medical coercion, and legal protections for patients who wanted to make medical decisions without family involvement. Medical coercion is a form of domestic abuse that takes advantage of illness and vulnerability, Elena told the subcommittee. We need legal frameworks that recognize this abuse and provide meaningful protection for patients who are being pressured to make medical decisions that are not in their best interests. The legislation that resulted from those hearings became known as the Patient Self-Determination Protection Act, and it included many of the recommendations Elena had made. The law created federal protections against medical coercion, established funding for patient advocacy programs, and required healthcare institutions to develop protocols for identifying and addressing family manipulation. Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her experience with Maya's betrayal had contributed to legal protections that would help other patients avoid similar abuse. Maya's attempt to control Elena's medical decisions had ultimately led to stronger safeguards for patient autonomy and independence. 2 years after Maya's sentencing, Elena received notice that Maya was eligible for parole review. As the victim of Maya's crimes, Elena was invited to submit a statement to the parole board about whether Maya should be released early. Elena spent weeks considering her response. Maya had served less than half of her sentence, but she had apparently been a model prisoner, participating in therapy programs and educational courses. The prison counselor reported that Maya had made significant progress in understanding the psychological factors that had led to her crimes. But Elena also knew that Maya's manipulation had been so sophisticated and systematic that early release felt premature. Maya had spent months planning Elena's death, had demonstrated remarkable skill at deception and emotional manipulation, and had shown no genuine remorse until after her conviction. Elena's statement to the parole board was brief and direct. Maya Martinez systematically worked to convince me that my life wasn't worth saving. She exploited my trust, manipulated my fears, and forged my signature on medical documents. While I hope she has gained insight into her behavior through prison programs, I believe she should serve her full sentence as a consequence for the seriousness of her crimes and as a deterrent to others who might consider similar actions. The parole board denied Maya's application, noting that the systematic nature of her crimes and the vulnerability of her victim warranted completing the full sentence. Maya would not be eligible for parole again for another 3 years. Elena felt relief at the decision, not because she wanted Maya to suffer, but because she believed that certain crimes required full accountability. Maya's actions had been too calculated, too sophisticated, and too dangerous to warrant early forgiveness. By the 3rd anniversary of her cancer diagnosis, Elena had built a life that was fuller and more meaningful than anything she had imagined before her illness. Her advocacy work had expanded to include policy development, legislative testimony, and international consulting on patient rights and medical autonomy. Elena had also discovered that her experience with betrayal and survival had given her unique insights into resilience and recovery that extended beyond medical settings. She had begun working with other survivors of family abuse, helping them understand how trauma bonds and manipulation tactics could persist even after the immediate danger had passed. David had proposed to Elena on the 2nd anniversary of Maya's sentencing, choosing that date deliberately to mark transformation rather than trauma. Elena had said yes, not because she needed someone to complete her or rescue her, but because she had learned the difference between healthy partnership and manipulative control. Their wedding was small and intimate, attended by colleagues from Elena's advocacy work, medical professionals who had supported her during treatment, and a carefully chosen group of friends who had become Elena's chosen family. Dr. Harrison performed the ceremonial first dance, a tradition Elena had requested to honor the man whose belief in her story had quite literally saved her life. Elena's wedding ring was inscribed with a simple phrase that captured everything she had learned about survival and self-determination. Trust yourself. It was a daily reminder that her own instincts and judgment were more reliable than any external authority, no matter how much that authority claimed to love her. The inscription also served as a reminder that Maya's greatest crime hadn't been the attempt to kill Elena, but the attempt to convince Elena that her own life wasn't worth fighting for. Maya had tried to make Elena doubt her own worth, her own judgment, her own right to make medical decisions about her body and her future. But Elena had learned that self-trust was both a survival skill and a form of resistance. Every decision she made based on her own assessment, rather than someone else's manipulation, was a victory over Maya's legacy of control and deception. Elena's story had become a case study in medical schools and nursing programs, an example of how family dynamics could complicate patient care and how healthcare providers could recognize and address manipulation by family members. Her testimony had influenced professional guidelines for patient advocacy and family communication in medical settings. But more important to Elena, her story had become a source of hope and validation for other patients who were facing pressure from family members to make medical decisions based on factors other than their own well-being. Every email from a patient who had learned to trust their own instincts, every phone call from someone who had recognized manipulation in their own family, represented a life potentially saved and a future reclaimed. Elena had transformed Maya's betrayal into a force for protection and healing that extended beyond her own recovery. She had taken the worst betrayal imaginable and used it to help other people avoid similar betrayals, to strengthen legal protections for vulnerable patients, and to advance understanding of medical coercion as a form of abuse. Maya's letter from prison had been accurate about one thing. Something good had come from the terrible things Maya had done to Elena. But that good had come from Elena's choice to transform her trauma into advocacy, not from any inherent value in Maya's actions. Elena had created meaning from her suffering, but Maya deserved no credit for that creation. As Elena settled into her new life as a married woman and established advocate, she occasionally wondered about Maya's life in prison, whether Maya had genuinely changed or was simply performing rehabilitation the same way she had once performed loving sisterhood. But those thoughts were fleeting and infrequent.
Elena's energy was focused on the future, on the patients who needed advocates, on the policies that needed changing, on the relationship she was building with David based on mutual respect rather than manipulation, on the life she had fought to save and was now determined to live fully. Maya had tried to convince Elena that
Some fights weren't worth winning, that some lives weren't worth saving, that choosing death over struggle was the wise and loving choice. Elena had proven Maya wrong in every possible way, and she continued to prove Maya wrong every day that she chose to keep fighting, keep building, keep helping others fight for their own right to survive and thrive. The final victory over Maya's betrayal wasn't Elena's survival, though that was certainly important. The final victory was Elena's transformation of that survival into something larger and more meaningful than her own recovery. Maya had tried to end Elena's story, but Elena had instead used Maya's betrayal as the beginning of a new chapter focused on protecting others from experiencing similar abuse. Elena's life had become living proof that betrayal doesn't have to define you, that trauma can be transformed into purpose, and that the people who try to convince you that your life isn't worth fighting for are always, inevitably, wrong. 5 years had passed since Elena last spoke Maya's name aloud. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.